And welcome back to the stage, your amazing mentors in CHPC, Michelle, Lauren, and Sean. Give them a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, the team is going to hand out our next session. So excited. This is one of my favorites. Now, this is a big turning point, y'all. Remember, those first 6 sessions were really about focal points and just understanding where people kind of are and what their agency and what their habits are. And then we went into the quick wins, because when we're doing clarity and energy, when we're doing influence, productivity, courage, when we're doing all those, there's a level in which they're still getting to know you. And I designed those to get some quick insights for you, and also to give the client some quick wins of some commitments, some insights, specifically with the worksheets, some new tools or new ways to thinking. So those first ones are to kind of get them in the game, to help them understand the context of high performance, to help them understand really fast. I really want to understand that these were outcome-driven sessions. And that's why we started with those. But you'll remember on day 1, I also said, look, to experience clarity and energy, courage, productivity, and influence, the only way to do that long-term is to master your mind and your body and your ability to get stuff done and your ability to work with other people, your ability to stay on track for your purpose. Remember that grid from day 1? Psychology, physiology, productivity, persuasion, purpose, presence. Now, presence is always in game, right? Every session is about your presence, their presence. It's always part of being there and showing up is putting them in a place of higher presence, because you're asking such great questions. But these next couple sessions go deep into that psychology, physiology, productivity, and persuasion in, I would say, almost a more conceptual manner, so that we're broadening their viewpoint. Like the first couple, the way I designed it was, the first couple, we really want to actually narrow them a little bit, get them refocused back in life. You know, so we get them focal points, right? Clarity. First 2, wham, wham, helping them get rooted in where they're at and where they want to go. So the first, instead of like blowing their minds and going highly conceptual, in the first 6 sessions, what I try to do is get them focused. And now we're going to broaden up. We're going to let the reins go a little bit as we go into the concepts of psychology, physiology, productivity, persuasion. So we're almost opening up the reins now. And we can do that because also in that narrowing down those first 5 sessions, we helped you learn so much about them. Now you know more about them, and now you can let those reins out a little bit more too. So these, I think, at this point, this becomes a big turning point in the sessions. The last influence one, I think you could all tell from the panel, we like those ones because it's very emotional, and we get to know them a little bit better. I specifically put that there for that reason, right? I wanted a deeper connection between us and the clients before we move them into what can feel like a more conceptual thing, like psychology. So that now we have a deeper trust. They've had the quick wins and the insights with us, and now we can let it out a little bit and move into psychology. So with that, Michelle Huliev, your community manager, is going to walk us through the psychology section. Ladies and gentlemen, give her a round of applause. Excited.
Okay, like Brendan said, with this session, it's really broadening the conversation and going deep with it. So starting off with question number 1, if you had to describe how your mindset, how your mindset has made you...
Hold on. Let me do the session topic over you.
Okay.
Then I'll pass the questions to you. Okay. With this session, we are halfway through the initial round of coaching. Okay? That's assuming that they signed up for 12 sessions with you. Okay? Now, those 12 sessions can be weekly sessions, which is what most of us do. They can also be monthly sessions. It can be 1 per month if you choose to do that. Some clients choose to do that. So when we say initial round of coaching, we say that because when you see that, the reason it says initial round of coaching is assuming that that 12 session is what you sold. Some of you might have sold more than that. I don't know, right? As we talk about on Friday, some of you will have different bundles, different ways you package together. So I just wanted to preface that. If you're reading that, we're halfway through this initial round. The initial round means this is 6 of 12. Raise your hand if you follow. So I don't want you to get confused later when you go home and read that. Our goal this session, which is, again, halfway through the coaching program now, is to start going deeper in the 6 pillars of high performance: your psychology, physiology, productivity, persuasive skill, presence, and purpose. We start with psychology. The world's highest performers have learned to master their mind. I'm sure you've thought of that before. And for me, psychology and psychological discipline is one of the most important topics for high performance because, and this is a great place for you to share a time when you felt like you didn't have control of your thoughts or your emotions. Was there a time like that where you felt, not just maybe like clarity would be like I felt lost. Psychology felt like your mind was getting the better of you. Maybe you had a lot of doubtful thoughts. Maybe you had emotions that didn't allow you to feel confident. And a lot of people in psychology, when they have trouble like grabbing that word, I often think of, well, but everyone understands mindset and managing your thoughts, and everyone understands emotions, and everyone understands that feeling or lack of feeling of confidence when our psychology is working for us or working against us. So that's the frame that I might go into, is sharing that, so it's kind of understandable, right, from my own perspective. Now, you all have different ways that you could talk about your own mindset, your own emotions, maybe talk about your own times of confidence or not. But I want to remind you on this one especially, and especially the next couple of sessions as we go into them, that framing of discuss why the topic is meaningful to you is really important for framing everything before we jump into the sessions. Then we say, I'd love to hear how you feel about this topic and how it's affecting your performance. So let me ask you a few questions, and then I'll hand it off to Michelle.
So the question number 1, if you had to describe how your mindset made you successful to a person who you're mentoring, how would you describe it? So this is getting people to really stop and pause and think about, what are their thoughts? How are their thoughts impacting, positively impacting them, and creating more awareness for themselves. And maybe it's rewording it a little bit. Sometimes people need help, like maybe they don't know what that means as far as mindset. So what are you saying to yourself? What are you thinking? What are those thoughts that are going through your mind that have really served you? What has been working for you? And really creating that awareness for people. Then question number 2, what's one belief you could adopt about yourself that would make you feel more happy or confident? I think this is again thinking about like what are some things you can do? What can you be saying to yourself that can help you to be happier, to be more confident, and maybe even breaking it down into just focusing on happy or focusing on confident, breaking it down to one at a time, so maybe it doesn't feel overwhelming for the client to think about those, but really kind of slowing it down and breaking that down.
Okay, let me pause you right there. I want you to make sure as you're listening, write some of the phrases she said, because that was brilliant, by the way. She said, what could you say to yourself to make you feel X? That's a really great way to bring psychology home. What could you say to yourself? It's self-talk, right? So make sure as you're listening to these panelists, they're giving you, I know it's easy to kind of go into a warp zone right before lunch. Make sure you're writing down these phrases. That was great. What could you say to yourself? That's when we need to add that. We need a next version of this. That was really good. Is she awesome? Man, so good. I love that one.
Then number 3, do you ever find yourself focusing too much on negative thoughts or your faults? So by this point, you have already had a lot of conversations, 6 sessions before this with your clients. So you probably already know the answer to this question, but I think it's really important to ask this question anyways and kind of revisit this. You have an idea of what they're thinking from your previous sessions and what their mindset kind of is, but be sure to ask this question because it brings up, it's an opportunity to revisit some things and gives you a little more opening for some more conversation. And then if so, when does this happen and what are those thoughts or faults? How are they affecting you? Again, creating that awareness, but this is creating awareness like what are you thinking, what are you focusing on that maybe isn't serving you? It's that slowing down and allowing them to pause, to think about how their thoughts are affecting them positively and negatively as we go through this session. What could you do to create a healthier, more positive psychology in life? And I think this is a huge piece of the session, like really spending a lot of time on this question, because this is the forward part of like taking a look, we've created some awareness where the positive thoughts and negative thoughts and how it's impacting their life. But also now we're looking at what can you do to feel better, have more positive thoughts. What can you bring in? What can you do? How do you create that habit? So that's that forward movement in the session. And really challenging them to generate not just one option, but a lot of different options here. Like, how do you create that? How do you make that habit? I think that's a really important piece, and spending a lot of time really digging here and really challenging and generating those options. I really love the worksheets in this session. I use them a lot. I especially like to get to this session. Let's see, it's the Tenants of Psychological Mastery. And the first part of this is focus and live from your strengths, not your limitations. I may not get to all of these in the session because it's a lot to cover, depending on the conversation earlier in the session, but I really like to hit the top 5 strengths. What are your top 5 strengths in life? And I give people space for this because people seem to have a hard time coming up with their top 5 strengths. That's what I've noticed going through the sessions. They may come up with 1 and then just kind of stop. But I really encourage my clients to come up with 5, and I will sit there and wait for them to come up with 5. And, just allow them that space to really think about it, and then I repeat them back to them and really kind of celebrate and cheer them on. And I encourage them to really write them down once we go through this, really write them down and honor them for their strengths and really highlight it, because I don't think people do that often enough. They focus on, just like the first session question talks about, they focus on their weaknesses a lot, but really encouraging them to focus on their strengths, really celebrating that, really bringing that energy when you repeat them back to them after they come up with them. I think that's a really powerful, important piece. And then, if there's time, I go through the rest of this portion of it. But another piece I really make sure to hit is the use of the power of positive questions to direct your mind. And this is the idea that when you ask yourself a question, your mind is going to go search for the answer. So if you're asking yourself a negative question, your mind's going to go look for a negative answer and come up with that. But if you're asking yourself positive, empowering questions, your mind's going to go find a positive, empowering answer. So it's creating those questions to ask yourself on a consistent basis that brings up that positivity, that positively directs your mood, your mindset, your day, how you're showing up. And this is something I really sit through and encourage my clients to come up with those 5 questions, and then the way that they're gonna remind themselves of these questions on a daily basis. And these are 2 things I really focus on in this area. And you'd be surprised at how many people they come back sessions later and say, I still have that Post-it on my mirror with my questions, and I look at it every day while I'm brushing my teeth. And because it's powerful, it's really, really powerful. So I make sure those 2 areas I really make sure to hit with these sessions. And then the last part of this is control your RWID, which stands for relative weight of importance and duration. And that's the concept that for every thought that you have, you assign a level of importance to it, whether it's positive or negative, for the amount of time you spend focusing on it, all of those pieces add up. So if you're assigning a lot of importance to a negative thought and you're focusing on it for a long amount of time, things are gonna feel negative and you're gonna have that negative emotion to it. But if you're focusing on your positive thoughts more, you're gonna feel more positive and empowered. And so it's taking a look at, like, what thoughts do you need to have more on your mental dashboard? What do you need to focus on more? What do you need to be thinking about and giving more attention to? So it's kind of creating that awareness around, like, what do you need to be pulling front and center? And then, next time, and it's kind of retraining, the next piece is about retraining your mind. The next time you have those negative thoughts that come up that you may be spending too much time on, how are you going to flip it around and focus on the positive and bring what will really serve you front and center? And I think those are really powerful pieces. And I always encourage my clients, even if we go through these sessions or these worksheets during the session, I tell them to go back and go through them again, because I think there's so much that comes out of journaling, that reflection after the sessions. It's just incredible. So even if we've done the whole worksheet together and talked through it all, I tell them to go back through it again and just really take the time and spend the time to go through the homework. And I think that's a really, really important piece. So those are my takeaways.
Round of applause. Woo! Woo! Awesome. Lauren, Sean, anything to add?
All right, so I love the session.
I love this session!
I do love it. So for question 1, when you're asking them about to describe their mindset, whatever they share, like, I've always been happy or I've always been positive, I have them explain what that means to them, to me, because my definition of happy or positive can obviously be very different. So I always like to get that clarity on them and have them explain it. And then, I'll ask them, so when last did you feel that way, right? Because as Brennan says, often they'll give you answers that they know that they should do, but are they doing it consistently? So I'll always throw that in. And then with question 2, it blows me away on this one when people share what that new belief is. I always ask them, as they say it, I'll say to them, so as you say that to me, how much do you believe it? And so often they go, I don't really believe it. I'll go, okay, so that's not going to work, right? And so I'll spend a lot of time with them reframing it or rewording it until they can tell me that, like, I believe that. And then I'll ask them, so if you believe that, if you really believe that you're worthy or deserving or whatever it is, how's your day going to be different tomorrow if you show up like that? So again, it's helping them project into the future the impact of having that. And so I love that question. I can spend a lot of time on that one. And then my last point is with the worksheet. As Michelle said, I think this worksheet is absolute gold. One of the questions I always make sure that I do spend some time with is the questions. So helping them generate those questions. So I always like to do the first 2 in the session if I can, so that I make sure that they on the right track with those, because sometimes the questions that they generate maybe aren't explicit enough to really serve them. And so I just like to kind of get them going on that in that part of the worksheet.
Love it. Round of applause for Lauren.
These guys have done such a great job. I just want to add an even more, because I think a lot of people struggle with negative self-talk. I think this is an epidemic with the people that we're going to serve. So I believe that these guys gave great feedback, and what I would add is I actually will bring them through a visualization exercise during the call that gets them connected to this in visualizing themselves that way. And then I will challenge them to spend time in the morning or before they go to bed at night doing the same visualization, because I know from my own experience and from those that I've worked with that when they can see it, they can connect to it differently. And if they say it and see it, then we have even a more profound connecting point. So that's just one thing I want to add.
Round of applause. Great. Great, Sean. How many of you in this room read one personal development book last year? At least one. Okay, look around the room. Look around the room. Okay. How many of you in this room have studied personal development, let's say, more than 5 years? You've been really passionate about this. Okay, look around the room. No, really look around the room, please. Yeah. Okay. How many of you watch less than 4 hours of television a day? A day. Less than, okay. Look around the room. Okay. 3 points of evidence you're not normal. And here's why I bring this up. The easiest thing to do when you do what we do, and you are who we are, is to discount this as too elementary. Meaning, you look at this session, and I struggle with this the first 2 years of teaching this with CHPC, of not realizing until later. I listened to the audio calls of some CHPCs who submitted them to us, and I realized, oh, see, we think negative thinking is something that you should have dealt with by now. The power of mastering your thoughts, having a positive mindset, wanting to be happy? You and I have been studying that for years, if not decades. You and I have read books on that. The general public has not. The general public completes reading, on average, worldwide, 2 books a year, okay? That's what they self-report, which usually means maybe 1. So the general public isn't reading books in general, and they're certainly not reading personal development books. You're weird that you've read personal development books. I really mean that. You know, I do a lot of work with Success Magazine. And I remember working, first time working with Stuart, who's the CEO and publisher. He runs the company and has for over a decade now of Success Magazine. He kind of brought it to life, brought it back to life. And he and I were talking, and he says, Brendan, people walk into the airport, and on the shelf it says success. Who doesn't want that? But you know what they buy? People. You know what they buy? Naked chicks. You know what they buy? Like 6-pack abs. You know what they buy? He's like, people actually don't invest in their personal development. And I always remind that to coaches. Because sometimes we look at something like this, well, duh, do you have any negative thoughts? How elementary does that seem? But it's not. Most of the general population has never really sat and thought about or even talked through how much negative thinking they really do have. Out of a general population in which over 60% of us will have a mental illness in our lifetime. 60% of people will have a mental illness in their life. They'll fall into depression at one point in their life. How many of you have ever had a period of depression in your life? Now look around the room. Most people will have those experiences and situations in their life, and yet less than 11% of Americans have ever seen a therapist. Over 60% will experience a diagnosable mental illness in their lifetime. Many of that does come towards the end of their life when it's depression, or even some dealing with dementia or Alzheimer's. That will categorize as well, so it's a bigger number. I would look to a lot of American Psychological Associations saying it's around 50% will have a serious mental health condition at some point in their life. Dr. Daniel Amen says that over 70% of people will. So I don't know what the numbers are, but they're all above 50%. And yet less than 11% have ever seen a therapist, and less than 4% have ever had a coach. So these concepts, I don't want you to ever take them for granted. Ever. Most people haven't talked through their negative thinking. You and I take it for granted, so that means we're going to have to do our work to help them find the words. That's why I love what Michelle said. What would you say to yourself? Give them the self-talk. Ask them to come up with the self-talk. If you ever talk about, this is important for those of us who have sort of academic backgrounds, when there's a concept, the most important thing we can ever do is immediately land the plane, they call it. Meaning, if there's a concept, give a context. So, if I say, have you ever had negative thoughts? Pause, and they're like, well, yeah, sure. I mean, sometimes I think I'm, fat or ugly or something. I say, oh, okay. Well, have you ever had any negative thoughts at work? Is there any projects going on right now where you're just thinking you don't feel like you're capable? Is there any days where you kind of finished the day and you felt just kind of dread? Meaning I'll give them the negative thoughts or negative emotions in context. The day, the work. Are there any relationships right now where you just feel like you're not yourself? Because psychology is identity as well. So I'll contextualize those things to make it land, because there's been plenty of time, I don't know if you all have experienced it, when you talk about negative thoughts, sometimes they don't have a lot yet. Because they haven't, they might get 1 or 2, but there's a lot going on for negative thinking, and sometimes people need it. I've asked sometimes, you have any negative thoughts? Nope. Okay. Do you have, any negative thoughts at work? Nope. Do you ever think in your marriage that you're unhappy? And all of a sudden, yeah. I say, okay. Do you think any negative thoughts ever come into your mind that make you feel even more unhappy? Oh, yeah. until I contextualized it, they didn't have the answer. So that's where getting into this session is a little deeper, and I put it in this specific order to only come after those other 6 sessions, because now I know about those contexts, right? Now I can put negative thinking into their marriage or into their work or into the teenager or wherever, because now I know the context in which they've shared struggles with me before. Raise your hand if you follow. So sometimes we got to give them not only language, we got to give them where to land that thing. And that's really helped my sessions come a little bit further in psychology. And then I never forget that for me, I hit these words that are really important. It's number 2 for me. A lot of the conversation in this one, for me, is about happiness and confidence. I would say almost half of my conversations revolve around those 2 topics in some way or another. Even if we might ask another question, it seems to come back to positive thinking, positive emotions, positive behaviors, right? People forget all the time, psychology is the science of the study of human mind and behavior. Behavior is not separate than psychology. Behavioralism was a subset of psychology. So it's about their positive actions too. So when we hear about unhappiness, it's not just like you need to sit in a room and do a gratitude journal. You need to stop being an asshole to your wife. Sorry, that came out loud. Was that loud? That was loud. Didn't mean to swear. But you follow what I'm saying? It's not just self-reflection, it's how you're being in the world. Your psychology is how you are being in the world as much as it is how you are thinking in the internal world. When you look up psychology's definition on the internet, you'll see it's the science of both mind and behavior. People forget that. So I'm trying to make that context land. Their behavior, I'm after their behavior in here as much as their thoughts. So when I talk about confidence, it's not just like, do you think low of yourself? It's, so you say you're kind of confident. Tell me about the last networking situation you walked in. How confident were you then? Scale 1 to 10. Because, a lot of my work, I like to put scales on things, 1 to 10. Well, I was only maybe a 6. Well, what were you saying to yourself that made it a 6 versus like a 10? And now that confidence isn't just like general, conceptual. It's networking meeting, what are you saying to yourself? And that's how I make this even feel more bulky as a session, because I don't want it to feel, up in the clouds, esoteric. I want it to land in their real life. So again, having done your homework before this session, if you're ever going to obsess about reading your notes from prior sessions, this is the obsession point. I mean, I'm crazy about reading about where they've been, what they've been through, what we've been talking about before this session. I probably spend more time in review on this one than anything else, because everybody wants happiness. Everybody wants confidence. Everyone wants to think positive of themselves, of the world, but they don't. And people feel a lot of movement and momentum in this. Last part, I've been blessed to coach 2 billionaires. And the first one I ever did, the first time he really ever gave me any feedback about it, took a screenshot, from his iPhone, I should say, but, took a picture of this worksheet, filled out, sent it to me in a text, and it was just a picture of this filled out, and he wrote, and forgive my language, I'm quoting here. I am not swearing on my stage with this word, I am quoting. But he sent me the picture of this filled out, and in text, in capital letters in the text, it said, fuck. Because as you've heard, the worksheets were deep. And I was like, oh, I'm onto something with this worksheet thing. And honestly, that was the moment that I decided in CHBC that I would make sure every session had a worksheet. It was from that feedback of people liking it. So again, I don't want you to think that any of this, when you say what are your top strengths, like she said, they might not know. Don't think that this is going to be necessarily an easy session, but also don't assume that people have ever thought about any of this stuff. I am stunned by how many people have never thought about their negative thoughts. To this day. I mean, obviously, I'm in this world. So I hope that's a good fodder for you to be thinking about, like, this is a great session. I mean, this, like I said, this is a real turning point. You're going to learn a lot about your clients here. Okay, with that, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to find your partner. If you were a coach last time, be a client this time. So try to match up with that. So that means you got to walk around and say, what were you, what were you, what were you? So find a partner. You have 5 minutes to read this and get ready. Then we'll put up the dial for 20 minutes. 5 minutes, go.